Hello, my name is Khalid and today you're getting the world's first hands-on review of the Tolino Epos 3. It's an 8-inch e-reader with a 300 ppi E-Ink Carta 1200 display and if you like, also with Android. What I mean by that and how the Epos 3 performs in everyday use, we'll check it out together. Let's first talk a moment about who Tolino actually is, because it's not widely known outside of Europe. Tolino is an alliance of Germany's largest booksellers who have combined their efforts to establish a strong rival to Amazon Kindle. That endeavor paid off, because they managed to do exactly that. A few years ago, Kobo joined the Tolino Alliance as the technology partner and took the place of Deutsche Telekom. Which brings us back to the Epos 3. You might have seen the design of the device somewhere else already, because the Tolino Epos 3 mostly has the same hardware as the Kobo Sage, which is a result of that partnership I mentioned. The Epos uses a quad-core all-winner B300 CPU with up to 1.8 GHz, which is accompanied by 1 GB of RAM. The device also has 32 GB of non-expandable internal storage. The e-reader is also IPX8 water resistant, so you don't have to be too careful around a pool or in a tub. Of course, the Epos 3 also uses the same asymmetrical design as the Kobo Sage. So the bezel is a bit wider on one side for easier handling. There are also two mechanical hardware buttons to flip the pages. Unlike the buttons on the Tolino Vision 6 or the Kobo Libro 2, the buttons on the Epos 3 can be pressed on their full length and have a confidence-inspiring click on them. While it's not needed for practicality, the flush screen emphasizes the high quality of the device. It simply looks more modern and high-end. Also, it doesn't gather dust around the edges of the screen. The frame on the side and around the back is one piece and is made of some kind of rubberized plastic. I like the feel as it makes the device easier to hold. The build quality is incredibly nice, which in part has something to do with the relatively low weight of only 232 grams. You think it would be heavier than that when first seeing it, but when picking up the Epos 3, it feels surprisingly light. That makes handling the Epos 3 very easy and comfortable. And also the asymmetrical design helps with that. The grip has a very subtle curve leading to the edge of the device, which helps in locking the device between your fingers without needing much effort. The thickness of the e-reader is also a bit asymmetrical, with it being thinner on one side and increasing in thickness towards the grip. With around 7.6 mm in thickness, it's still incredibly thin. Despite that, the Epos feels sturdy and doesn't flex even when trying. One small annoyance for me are the strong magnets of the device. They are so strong that you can actually put the Epos 3 on a fridge and it stays there. It's annoying to me because I usually have stuff lying around my desk, and putting the Epos on top of something will more often than not make it stick to the e-reader. The other day I was preparing the video for the Onyx Books Note Air 2 Plus review and I put the Epos 3 on top of it. When picking up the Epos 3, the Books tablet almost fell off the desk because it was sticking to the e-reader. Let's talk about the display and the touchscreen. There are a few things to unpack here. The Tolino Epos 3 uses an 8-inch flush E-Ink Carta 1200 display. Contrast levels are as good as to be expected when not using the inbuilt light, and become great when switching on the LEDs. Deep blackness levels are maintained even when turning up the brightness. The contrast of the text is super satisfying thanks to the rich blacks of the letters. It's easy to read, and thanks to the 300 ppi resolution, everything looks super sharp as well. As typical with ink devices, the display is front-lit. In this case, the light is coming from the side and is dispersed across the screen with a light diffusing layer. Lighting quality is good, but certainly not perfect. There's a subtle gradient visible from right to left. That's not too surprising though, because most larger e-readers with an asymmetrical design suffer from that same fate. I'm really sensitive to uniformities like that. But of course, that's just me, and others might not perceive the gradient as I do. How pronounced it is also depends on the lighting setting. Having the LEDs dialed up to 100% and mixing warm and cold LEDs will make it more obvious, When lowering the brightness, as you should anyways do when reading conditions allow you to, it pretty much becomes invisible. So that's just something to keep in mind. So let's talk about the touchscreen, because this one is interesting. The Kobo Sage also offers note-taking with the dedicated Kobo pen. The Tolino Epos doesn't have this option, because the software doesn't support handwritten notes. But since the device shares the same hardware, I was curious to see if you could use a compatible pen. Unfortunately, I don't have a Kobo stylus with me, but I have a couple of other ones. The capacitive stylus worked as expected because that's the main touchscreen technology needed to operate the e-reader with your fingers. But another stylus worked as well. The TCL Next paper pen, which is not capacitive, works on the Epos 3. That means that they didn't strip the touchscreen technology from the Epos 3, but simply choose not to use it. But of course, for everyday use, it doesn't really matter, because missing the software features will limit pen use like that on clicking elements of the UI. And that you can do with your fingers as well. So let's check out the software. This is where the differences to the Kobo Sage become very obvious, because it's simply a completely different UI than the one on the Kobo e-reader. The Tolino user interface doesn't offer as many customization options, but is very clean and intuitive to use. Responsiveness is fast in general. I was testing a pre-production software which ran stable with only one exception. When first opening a dictionary, the reading app force closed one time. But that was it. It didn't happen again and since. So I blame this on the pre-production status of the software. The home screen is divided into two parts, with the 3 latest books on top and the shop recommendations on the bottom. The ebook library offers a few different sorting options, which are helpful, but a bit reduced when comparing them to the likes of Kobo or Pocketbook. Good to know, you can also use Calibre tags to manage book collections for the Tolino software. Note-taking works as expected, but is limited to taking notes with the virtual QWERTY keyboard. As mentioned, there's hardware compatibility for some styluses, but that's not supported software-wise. There are 2 different dictionary modes. You can either look up a word in the explanatory dictionary or the translation dictionary. Both functions work locally without an internet connection and use the dictionary as a source, which can be more extensive in one language than in another. There are quite a few languages available. Find the whole list in the description below. You can adapt text styling in the usual ways, with changing size, font, line height, and margins. You can also install your own fonts. It's worth to mention that there's also an alternative reading app available, which can be activated through the settings menu. However, that's still in beta at the time of the recording. It offers a few more text styling options, but is missing the notes and dictionary function completely at the moment. The reason this is on here is DRM. The reading app is compatible with LCP DRM, which is used by the largest digital library provider in Germany. PDF functionality is extremely limited, so I will keep this part short. You can obviously open PDF files and have a text reflow mode available, but that's pretty much it. Zooming in and out of the PDF file can be done with the virtual buttons or by simply using pinch to zoom, but to be honest, it's not super responsive, which I think mostly has something to do with missing optimization, because the quad-core CPU is more capable than that. There's actually a workaround for using PDF files much more productively than what the Tolino software offers. I will come to that in a second. First, I want to mention the ebook shop. The store can be accessed directly from the home screen. Purchases are synced with the Tolino cloud service and are directly downloaded to the device. The Tolino software is actually built on top of the Android open source project. To be more precise, the Tolino UI is actually an Android launcher itself. So that means if you were able to install another launcher, you can get access to the rest of the system and wouldn't be limited to the Tolino UI. And that's actually possible with only a few relatively quick steps. You can either use a hidden debug menu to do so, or root the device to get full access to the system. Either way, you can access the Android UI and install other apps. The Tolino Epos 3 runs Android 8.1, so at this time an already pretty dated version of Android. However, many modern apps usually run without any issues on that version, so you can pretty much use any Android app you like. The catch in doing so is that Tolino didn't optimize the Android UI for anything other than the Tolino app itself. So you don't get different ink modes found in Onyx Books e-readers, for example. But more often than not, that's actually not a problem, as most apps run without any issues in the regular e-ink mode. Only if you want to use more dynamic apps, that's usually an issue. What that means, while it's not intended, you can actually use Android apps on the Epos 3. That means you can transform the Epos into an 8-inch Android tablet with a 300 ppi flush E-Ink Carta 1200 screen, which makes this e-reader an insider tip for people who love to customize their devices. With that option, you can also work around the mentioned shortcomings of the PDF functionality, for example. Simply install a more powerful PDF viewer and you're good to go. I tried just that and it confirmed my suspicion that the hardware is more capable than the Tolino software makes it out to be. Viewing large PDF file works like a charm with the right app. There will be a follow-up video on how to root the Epos 3, so sub to the channel to not miss it. In order to achieve the low weight and slim design, they had to compromise on battery capacity. At 1200 milliamps, it's comparatively low, which is noticeable in everyday use, unfortunately. In my test, reading for an hour with a brightness level and the smart light level of roughly 50%, and the e-reader set in airplane mode, the Epos lost 10% of charge. That means with reading 2 hours a day, you will have to charge the battery every 5 days or so. That's not completely terrible, but it's worse than many other e-readers. Another reason for that, besides the battery capacity, might be the new all-winner chipset the Epos 3 is using, and of course Android, which is running in the background of the Tolino UI. My overall experience with the Tolino Epos 3 was very positive. It's a high quality build with great contrast levels, a decent lighting quality, and a fast, clean, intuitive user interface. Of course, there are some downsides as well. The price is pretty high, especially in comparison to the Kobo Sage, which mostly uses the same hardware, but offers note-taking and Bluetooth by default. But then again, you can't use Android on the Sage. A potential issue can be the relatively short battery life. Depending on what your expectations are for an e-reader, you might be disappointed. So that's something to keep in mind when thinking about purchasing one. Other than that, I can recommend the Tolino Epos 3 to everybody looking for a lightweight 8-inch e-reader with a good display and hardware buttons. And everybody who likes to try Android on an e-reader but doesn't want to rely on the usual suspects. Do you think sacrificing battery life for a faster device, slimmer design and lighter weight is the right decision? I'd love to hear what you think about the Tolino Epos 3 in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe to the channel to help out with the YouTube algorithm. It just takes a second and is free, but would help me out tremendously. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.